Welcome to Tough Talk with Teachers.
Real teachers that are in the trenches every day sharing authentic struggles, successes, and you can't make this up type of stories.
Edu-earners that talk the talk and walk the walk.
Welcome back to another episode of Tough Talk with Teachers. Today we are doing something a little different. In the midst of this spring semester, life can feel like it's moving at a snail's pace, especially for those of you, like us, have had little to no snow, and thus no snow days. So for this episode, we're going to lighten up a bit. You, our listeners, submitted funny stories online or at our latest professional development at METC in St. Charles. Some of these stories are only things teachers can believe would happen. From Hooters and Hoes to wonderful things teachers over here have we got a show for you. If you feel inspired, submit your funny story in the link in the show notes and you may be featured on a future episode. For our first story, one educator ends up listening to his principal discussing something very unexpected on his first day of school.
My name is Jamie Russell. I'm an instructional technology coach at Cape Girardeau Public Schools, and this is my story about the Hooters principal. My very first day of teaching was probably one of the funniest things. You know, first day of teaching, you go in and you sit through meetings about rules and, updates and changes to policies and all of that. And my first principal, he was from the Bronx. Great principal. He was a bodybuilder, so he's just rough and tough, and he's got this Bronx accent and going through all of these things. And we would, after just a couple of minutes, start writing down different quotes and stuff. But the funniest one was he was talking about dress code and cut and coverage, but what was really funny, he was talking about, different slogans and appropriatenesses of shirts and different things that are on shirts. And one of the things was popular at the time was wearing Hooters shirts. And he goes, "Hey, these kids that come in here with the Hooters on their shirts and, talking like, I don't know, Hooters is just a restaurant. We know what the Hooters are, with this great accent. I'm in the middle of rural Missouri and, have a principal from the Bronx talking about Hooters. He said Hooters like 15 times. And it was absolutely hilarious.
This next teacher connects math to life in the most unexpected way. Let's listen.
And I'm William Ely. So I'm being observed, and there's another adult in the room. They are sitting towards the back of the room. One of my students sitting in the corner in the front of the room notices that there's someone else in the room with us. And you're trying to do your best and you're hoping all your students do their best. And so this girl who is, I don't know, about 20 feet from me, because I'm at the board and she's on the edge of the room, says in a stage whisper, "Mr. Mealy, what's that person doing back there?" Well, I happen to be teaching a geometry class. And I said, "Well," and I used the student's name, which I'm not using here, "here's a geometry lesson for you. She is equally distant from you as I am. So if I can hear you say, 'Who is that?' then she can hear you say, 'Who is that?'" Alrighty. Just kids being kids. Always a good time. For more stories like that, check out my podcast as well. It's called Unprofessional Development, Real Teachers Telling Real Stories.
Now this next educator has a student who is fixated on a very interesting topic.
I teach third grade, and one morning my students were all entering the room, and one of my attention-seeking students came in screaming and yelling about why girls have periods. And he just kept asking, "Why do women have periods? Why do women have periods?" And I was trying to ignore it and make it stop, and I was hoping he would eventually quit asking. And one of my students, who was the lowest student in the room, finally looked up at him and popped off with, "It's so they can end conversations."
Homophones are a wonderful aspect of the English language. However, not all homophones are completely understood.
All right, my name is Quentin Alamayu. I teach at Ladue Middle School, and I'm an integrated ELA and social studies teacher. And my funny story is we were doing an Oregon Trail simulation that I got from another conference that people shared it with me. And so there's 92 items on the paper. The font is like 6, maybe 7 size. And so I'm like, okay, let me practice. So everybody tell me one item that we want to have in the simulation. One thing I need to have in my wagon, because you have to put stuff in your wagon. Well, kid goes, how about a hoe? I'm like, a hoe? That's not on the paper. Stop trying to be funny. He's like, no, there it is. It's on there. And I'm like, oh, a garden hoe. You're right. I was like, okay. So I'm going to have a hoe in my wagon. At that exact moment, my principal comes in to do an informal observation. So as he walks in, I'm like, so how many hoes should I have on my wagon? And they're like, you got to have at least 4 hoes. So then I'm like, okay, I got to have 4 hoes, and I got to have a pistol. And he literally looks at me, and I was like, no, it's garden hose. It's cool. It's historically relevant. Go with it. And I was like, okay. And then we get to the end, and I have too much stuff. I was like, well, I got to get rid of one of my hoes. And he just walks out. He's like, I can't be here anymore. So that's my funny story about hoes, history, and kids learning.
Even educators have embarrassing moments. This poor teacher was told an embarrassing thing at the exact wrong time.
All right, my name is William Chamberlain. When this story took place, I was in 5th grade. I was standing in the hallway before school started with a few of my colleagues. We were standing around in a circle and we were talking about whatever going on. And I looked down and noticed that the colleague to the left of me's pants was unzipped. And as I noticed this, the kids came around the corner, headed to the classroom, so I leaned over quietly to him and I said, your pants is unzipped. And he jumped up and down and started squalling. His face got all red, pulling up on his zipper. It was the funniest thing. He did it right in front of all the kids.
When you first get your job and you have to sit through all of those seminars that tell you stupid stuff like don't look up certain things on the internet or don't use your school device for personal reasons, well, this teacher should have listened a little more closely.
Story, yeah. So Bob Dylan, that's like an awful introduction, right? Like I get to be Bob Dylan every day of my life. I can't sing, I can't play the guitar or play the harmonica, but there you go. My story is I had a teacher come to me. I take that back. It wasn't a teacher that came to me. It was a student that came to me. I was a middle school principal and said, I found these photos of my teacher and his girlfriend. And I was like, what do you mean? So he hands me the picture, and my Spanish teacher at the time has pictures of him and his girlfriend just kissing on his computer. So not fireable, but I go down and I say, hey, what's the story on this? He's like, I don't even know how that's still on the computer. We were messing around last night. And I'm like, well, I'm glad that's all the messing around you were doing. And so I remember having to say like, hey, I love you to death, but we still have to document the fact that you got caught with that. But the students never really let him live that down. He was making out on screen with his girlfriend while he was a middle school Spanish teacher. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that no one hears about. And it gets buried under the covers. So I'm sure that under the covers, right? That's perfect. That's my story about how it rolls in middle school.
Isn't it amazing when students don't believe that we really can hear everything that goes on in our classrooms?
So it was the first year that I was at Cape Central, which made it about 17 years ago. But I had told my students that I had really good hearing, so if they were going to talk about anything in class, they should be prepared that it very well that I may hear it. Well, we came in one day and there's a football player in the back row talking, and I told him, you really need to change the topic. And he said, you can't hear me. And he continued talking. So I told him, you need to change the topic. And he says, you can't hear me. So I went back to the back of the room. I whispered in his ear, I hope your girlfriend isn't pregnant too. He turned beet red. I went back to the front of the room and said, can I hear you? And he nodded yes. I said, would you like to change the topic? And he nodded yes.
What happens when animals get loose in school? Let's find out.
So there's also the time that the bird got into school. I assume flew in one of the doors when the kids had it open, whatever. But it was a long way from the door when it got up to G South. Flying up and down the hall, I have never seen so many people scream and holler in my life. Thank goodness for Mr. Hahn, who taught environmental studies and came with his net, because yes, he had a net in his classroom, caught the bird and released it to the wild.
The things kids say when we give them an assignment can be rather unique.
Hi, my name is Kim Wilcox. I'm a third grade teacher in the Fort Osage School District. I have a student teacher who was asking a student to do some makeup work. He grabbed it from her, farted on it, and said, "I'm not doing that," and threw it on the floor.
Our next educator tells us a story of grandmother's house and the fragrant odors that come from that wonderful, magical place.
My name is Taylor Tholen. I was a FACS teacher, a family consumer science teacher, but I taught cooking classes. I do instructional technology now, so one of my first few years when I was teaching, anytime there's any smell coming out of your classroom, there's always students who have an opinion about that smell, and it's usually negative because, if you're not actually eating the dish, then it doesn't smell good. But we were doing monkey bread one time, which is essentially like cinnamon rolls, and it smells good. And so I'm in the hallway, and it smells good in the hallway. So people were walking by, and there's a kid that just says, "It smells like my grandma's house. It smells awesome." And I thought to myself, yeah, my grandma made cinnamon rolls all the time. It does smell like my grandma's house. And the guy walking next to him said, "Not my grandma's house. My grandma's house smells like cat piss and cigarettes." And I thought to myself, I'm lucky to have a really good grandma.
This next story is when a kindergartner takes something rather literal.
My name is Kimberly Belial, and I'm originally from Western New York, but I'm teaching in Imperial, Missouri right now. But when I was teaching kindergarten one time, I looked at a little boy and I told him that he had his shoes on the wrong feet. And he said, "Hey, Miss B, these are the only feet I have."
A well-intentioned administrator does a drop-in on the first day of this kindergarten teacher's career. Nothing could go wrong, right?
So 4 years ago, I became an elementary technology teacher after having taught 4th and 5th grade for 14 years. And our tech director, who was also new to his role that year, decided he was going to visit every elementary technology teacher within the first week of school to check on them and see how they're doing. And he happened to visit me on the first day of school, very first time I'd ever taught a kindergarten class technology. And I had students come into the room. I was so nervous already because I'd never taught kindergartners before. They were just, pointing at my screen and trying to touch everything and spinning around like they couldn't sit still. And I just remember looking at him like, oh my goodness, what did I get myself into? And him just like, I don't know. So thankfully it's gotten better from there, but that was quite the first experience teaching a kindergarten class technology. And I almost forgot, I'm Hannah Dykeson. I teach elementary technology in the Fort Zumwalt School District.
Thanks for joining us on our funniest episode yet. Don't forget, if you want to submit your own funny stories, click the link in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you.
Here at Tough Talk with Teachers,
we know teaching is tough, but so are you.